Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see you all this evening. We are very pleased to welcome Jerri Clark from Washington State, who works for the Treatment Advocacy Center, to present tonight's lecture. I am Bethany Yiser, president of the Cures Foundation, and it is a great pleasure of Cures to welcome excellent speakers like Jerri. So, Jerri, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Bethany. I am delighted to have this opportunity to talk this evening about ambiguous loss, learning to grieve when severe mental illness leads to loss. I want to start by emphasizing the importance of using this terminology correctly. The term is ambiguous loss. The grief that happens because of ambiguous loss is complex, but the grief itself is not ambiguous. It is the losses that are ambiguous. So you may bump into this terminology, including online, used incorrectly. And it's really important to me that everyone who hears me speak about this topic understands the importance of using the terminology correctly, in large part because ambiguous loss is an external circumstance. It is something that happens in our lives external to us. And grief is an internal process. So it is the external circumstances of loss that create the ambiguity, that create the confusion, that create the challenges in coping. So I hope that you will share information with others about ambiguous loss and use the term to describe these external circumstances of loss that lead to a deeply complicated internal process of grief. But I want you to really understand that the grief caused by severe mental illness, whether it's your own illness or someone that you care for, that grief is not ambiguous. Your grief is complex, it's internal, and it is very, very clear when it's grief. And part of what's really important about coping with ambiguous loss is acknowledging your grief, acknowledging that this indeed is a grief experience that you're having caused by these confusing external circumstances that lack clarity. So let's get into it. My name is Jerri Clark. I am a resource and advocacy manager at the national nonprofit Treatment Advocacy Center, which is dedicated to eliminating barriers to the timely and effective treatment of severe mental illness. Over 26 years, TAC's mission has been largely to advocate for changes in laws and policies that get in the way of appropriate treatment for people who are the sickest of the sick. We have expanded into offering services to support families navigating SMI treatment systems within the last few years. And I'm part of the advocacy team that serves families and individuals through a helpline, through advocacy navigator trainings, through advocacy boot camp trainings for people who want to engage in system change advocacy. And my own personal project has been to learn more about ambiguous loss because of my own ambiguous losses. This is a picture of me with my son Calvin in 2018 in the fall. He died from suicide in 2019. Just about 3 months after this picture was taken. So I devote and dedicate all of my work to the memory of my son, Calvin. TAC was founded by Dr. E. Fuller Torrey, who has some very popular books about surviving schizophrenia, whether you are an individual with schizophrenia or a family member of somebody with schizophrenia. He also has a book about surviving bipolar disorder. This quote is really important to me because it captures why ambiguous loss work is an important topic for TAC to be spreading information about. Dr. Torrey said, until we find the causes and definitive treatments for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, we have an obligation to try to improve the lives of those who are suffering. And my goal through this ambiguous loss project is to improve the lives of those who are suffering, both from very complicated life-altering conditions and from those conditions in a treatment system that is not built to properly care for people who have those conditions. So when TAC uses the term, and TAC is the way that we describe Treatment Advocacy Center. So when you hear me say TAC, I mean Treatment Advocacy Center. When TAC uses the term SMI, we specifically mean severe mental illness, which is conditions that include symptoms of psychosis. And those are symptoms that are commonly associated with schizophrenia spectrum disorders, severe bipolar disorders, and major depressive disorders that include psychotic features. So we have a very narrow and targeted goal of improving treatment for the sickest of the sick in the system. So when I say SMI, this is what I mean. I want to define ambiguous loss for you in concise terms first, and then you'll see how the definition broadens as we move through the lecture this evening. In elevator pitch terms, an ambiguous loss is a loss that lacks clarity or resolution. It is the ambiguity that is not fixable that makes the ambiguous losses complicated. Because severe mental illness changes everything about how a family functions, it creates circumstances of ambiguous loss. Severe mental illness alters life opportunities related to education, work, housing. All of our family connections can be impacted. Our sense of safety, trust, and predictability can be affected by severe mental illness. So all of these can represent losses that are sometimes hard to identify, but identifying them as losses that lack clarity or resolution, helps create a construct for this experience of grief that we might be having, but we might be having a hard time pinpointing, oh, this is grief. I am feeling grief over the loss of this opportunity, how this relationship used to work, how I used to feel safe, and I used to feel like I could predict how things would go when I am with a certain person or in a certain situation. So recognizing the ambiguity of those losses can help us start to recognize our grief experience so that we can start to work with it. The concept of ambiguous loss was coined by Dr. Pauline Boss back in the 1970s. And I'm sort of stunned how slow it's been to catch on because it's such a relevant term, not only in severe mental illness, but also as it relates to dementia. That's probably the most common place where ambiguous losses are discussed, is when somebody has a dementia experience, but also traumatic brain injury, Parkinson's disease. There are also ambiguous losses related to victims of war or terrorism, kidnapping. Those are all experiences of ambiguous loss. I did Dr. Boss's online course through the University of Minnesota to become certified to train people on this topic. I also read a couple of her books, including this seminal book, which is quite clinical, although it's very readable. It's called Loss, Trauma, and Resilience: Therapeutic Work with Ambiguous Loss. I do recommend this book. Dr. Boss, well, I'll tell you that in a minute. I love this quote from this book: an ambiguous loss is a situational disorder beyond human expectation. So remember at the beginning when I said an ambiguous loss is external to the person, whereas the grief experience is internal. This external experience of ambiguous loss can also be described as a situational disorder. It is the situation that is ambiguous and also beyond human expectation. We never expected our lives to be impacted in the ways that they're impacted by severe mental illness. This is beyond human expectation, like 9/11 was beyond human expectation, like war experiences are beyond human expectation. That is the challenge of an ambiguous loss. So there are two primary types of ambiguous loss. First, there is psychological absence with physical presence. And this phrase, gone but not gone, can help us understand the paradox of this. When someone is forever changed by, for example, a psychiatric condition, they are still alive and in many ways still who they always were, but in many ways very changed from who they used to be and who we expected them to become. So that psychological absence with physical presence is kind of the most common form of ambiguous loss when we're talking about severe mental illness, especially as it impacts somebody that we love. There's also a physical absence with psychological presence. This might be a missing person or someone who is incarcerated and inaccessible to us. A suicide death also represents an ambiguous loss when there is physical absence. The person is truly gone, but they're still here psychologically for me in my heart and mind. So I experienced all of these versions with my own son. So severe mental illness often has both sides of this involved. A person, for example, might be in psychosis, so they are psychologically kind of gone at the same time they're still here, but then they might also be momentarily missing or incarcerated. So it might be both of these kinds of ambiguous loss impacting your family. All of these impacted my family. The difference between an ambiguous loss and a typical loss has to do with expectation. So remember, I described an ambiguous loss as beyond human expectation. It is within human expectation that we will have people and animals, pets that we love, die from age, accidents, illnesses, and these can be quite sad, but they are more within our human expectation. Grief is logically expected, and our culture kind of knows what to do to help us get through the initial shock of this loss so that life can continue onward with healing and resiliency. So an example of a typical loss in my life is that a few years ago, my cat Cleo, who I had for 20 years, died from kidney failure. She died in the care of a compassionate veterinarian, and we had an opportunity to say goodbye. My father died from cancer in hospice. I had an opportunity to say goodbye. Those are typical losses. They are still heartbreaking losses, but we kind of know how to work with them. An ambiguous loss, on the other hand, includes all of these elements of uncertainty, which can be intensely stressful because of this the nature of the ambiguous loss that defies expectation. Because of that, our culture often doesn't have typical norms or ways for others to support us in our loss, or even ways for us to realize that what we are doing is grieving, right? So my son died when he was 23 from suicide after 4 years of falling through all of the cracks in the very broken mental health care system. So I lost him before I lost him. All of that was so confusing. Is this grief? I feel like I've lost my son while I'm still trying to save his life. And then I did lose him to suicide, which will never be reconcilable, right? So this grief is very layered, the grief caused by ambiguous loss. The result is complex and confusing because it's difficult to know how to grieve when what has been lost is not entirely clear. So for example, when someone is gone, but maybe not gone, right? It's not entirely clear what's been lost. If there's no death certificate, maybe because the person is still living, but psychiatrically different, or maybe because they're missing, right? Or if there is a death, if those circumstances of death defy expectations. Because we cannot fix the ambiguity, it can be very confusing how to grieve. This is a place in Lawrence, Kansas, where there is a tree planted in my son's honor. And this was on one of his heavenly birthdays a few years ago at sunset. So I have found ways to grieve, but it is confusing. It's complicated. The ambiguity is the hard part because we can't fix the ambiguity. So when everyone is struggling to define the loss or maybe is very uncomfortable with the circumstances of loss, there aren't any clear norms and rituals to guide the grief process. You know, people knocking on the door with a lasagna to say, I'm so sorry your loved one is in a psychiatric hospital right now, just rarely happens. If it has happened for you, good on you for training your support people to understand that this is grief, right? Does somebody show up with an apple pie and say, here, cry on my shoulder. I am so sorry that your daughter is in psychosis again, right? We don't have those norms and rituals for ambiguous loss. So often the response to discomfort is avoidance, and that can lead to isolation, which makes this kind of loss really very lonely, very lonely. So give yourself grace. Lesson number one. If you are grieving because of ambiguous loss, your sadness shows that you are human, not that you are broken. If you are challenged by the grief of an ambiguous loss, it is because you are a feeling, compassionate human being experiencing something very sad and very confusing. Not because there is anything wrong with you or you're failing to get it. It's hard because it's hard. My yoga teacher years ago was trying to get into mountain biking, and she would ride her mountain bike up these steep hills near where we live. And she would say, oh, this is so hard. And her husband would say to her, hills are hard, right? It's not because she's not strong enough. It's because the hills are hard. Ambiguous loss is hard because it's hard, not because you're not strong enough. And there are some ways that we can actively cope. So before we get into the coping strategies, I'd love for you to participate in this Slido. All you have to do is turn on your phone camera and hover it over this QR code, and it's going to pop up with this poll question. The question is, please name something that you have lost ambiguously. It might be an opportunity. It might be a relationship. It might be someone's name. It might be my son, whatever it is. And you can enter more than one. And if this Slido thing is just like blowing your mind and you don't want to do it, you can either just skip it and think in your own mind what your loss is, or you can put it in the chat. It's all good. You can also go to slido.com and enter that code and participate that way. So it looks like some of you are figuring it out. So yay, I'm impressed. Good job. If you've never used Slido before, you guys are quick studies. Dreams and plans, my mom, my perfect son, my youth, a future, an expected future, a certain level of freedom. Claire, an empty nest. Yeah, yeah. Friends, schizophrenia. They're jumping around. The idea that I had that my life would go a certain way. Dreams, my youth, a future for my son and for us. Yes, absolutely. My smart son, freedom, time, retirement. Yeah, freedom in retirement. Good. You are on your way to learning to cope with ambiguous loss. Making a list is a great place to begin. Yeah. And boy, looking at this word cloud, don't you realize in this moment how not alone you are? We have so many shared experiences of ambiguous loss. Confidence, that's a good one. Closeness, yeah. A trajectory. Beautifully done, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. So these are the 6 coping strategies, and these strategies were named by Dr. Pauline Boss, who coined the term ambiguous loss. I have worked with these after doing Dr. Boss's training and created my own approach to using these coping strategies, especially as ambiguous loss relates to severe mental illness. So I'm going to go through each of these strategies, and I'm going to provide you with 3 inquiry questions that you can use for each of the coping strategies to do kind of some of your own self-awareness thought experiments to begin this process of actively coping with ambiguous loss. I'll tell you that these are not linear, but I like starting with find meaning because it gives you a foundation and a vocabulary to begin. All of the other ones are fluid. You can duck in and out at any time. And this is a lifelong process. It's not a checklist. You don't go through the inquiries and go, okay, got it. I got that adjust mastery thing figured out. I'm moving on, right? It doesn't work like that. These are strategies for living day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, because we do not get over an ambiguous loss. We learn to live with an ambiguous loss. We learn to partner with ambiguous loss as we move on in our lives. And I like to think of ambiguous loss sort of like a vessel of water. And think of your coping strategies sort of like food coloring. So if you had a small bowl of water and you dumped your food coloring into the water, it would be really colorful, right? If you expand the vessel and instead of a bowl of water, you have a bathtub of water, that food coloring is going to spread out. That's what the coping strategies can do for you. They can expand your vessel. They can expand your life possibilities so that the ambiguous loss is a less intense part of your experience of living. You will always have it there coloring your life, but it won't consume you. It won't freeze you. It won't take over all that you are and all that you do if you expand the vessel. So these coping strategies enable you to expand your vessel. So let's get into what these 6 strategies might include. The first is make meaning, and you've already begun. What have I lost? You can make a list. You can make a list on paper, by doing art, by taking photographs. This is a sinkhole on the Oregon coast, very near the place that I surf on a longboard. I did this walk hundreds of times. And the week before this sinkhole happened, I was standing next to that fence on a flat bed of sand looking at the view. My son's severe mental illness was like this sinkhole. This is a metaphor for what that ambiguous loss felt like to me. It felt like the ground went out from under me, and nothing that I had thought was solid anymore. So this image became a coping strategy for me. Yeah, it makes sense that I feel untethered, because this loss is like the ground went out from under me and I'm kind of in free fall, right? So whatever strategy you can use to consider, what have I lost? And what does this loss mean to me? This third question threads through all of the coping strategies. Are there both and emotions? Is it possible that I'm experiencing more than one thing at a time? So the ground went out from under me, and I became a much more present person in my life, because everything was staring me in the face all of a sudden. Things I had done as a routine part of living were all changed. So I had a both and experience. I had an experience of the ground's gone out from under me, and my vision is actually even more crystal clear than it used to be, because, oh my gosh, everything I thought was true is different. My whole life is rearranged. So getting very sophisticated in the way you describe your experience of being is a tool. Using your vocabulary, using your artistic tools to describe, what have I lost? What does it mean? And what's the complexity of that? That's a beginning place for coping. This next strategy is one of the hardest ones in the Western culture: adjust mastery. What is it that I'm trying to control that is not mine to control? This is a really hard one. So noticing, oh, I see what's happening here. I'm struggling for control, and this isn't up to me, right? So releasing that desire to be master of all things is another piece of our coping. It does not mean stop caring or stop trying. It means recognize when you're struggling for control in an area that is not yours to control. And what can I do instead to foster my own feelings of strength and resilience? So, for example, if I can't get my loved one the treatment they need to get out of this acute psychosis, can I write an extraordinary letter to somebody who might have the power to do something to help here? Or if all of that is failing, can I go do something I'm good at? Bake really good cookies and maybe deliver them to somebody who needs something sweet right now. What can I do that gives me a feeling of control? Do I need to clean out my junk drawer? Do I, what can I do instead so that I don't feel like everything I'm doing is futile? Right? So it might be related to the mental illness situation and it might be unrelated to the mental illness situation. But we need to find things in our lives that we know we're good at, that we feel successful at. That is a really important thing. And then what helps me let go of idealized relationships? So mastery over relationships is a trap. Trying to be the master controller of all of our relationships will always fail. I talked to a mom a couple weeks ago who was trying to figure out Thanksgiving with her son with schizophrenia. And she said, I'm trying to figure out what to do because my sister's hosting and my son's not doing very well right now. And I'm not sure whether to tell my sister to invite him or not invite him. And I'm not sure I should tell him about it. And I don't know. And I said, honey, you're not hosting. Who's invited isn't up to you. How your son behaves at your sister's house isn't up to you. You're trying to master everyone's relationships for them. Their relationships aren't going to be ideal. Your relationships aren't going to be ideal. Stop trying to master control everybody. And she just wept. She said, I have to reframe everything. So when are you struggling for control when it isn't yours to control, such as somebody else's behavior or somebody else's choices, right? What can you do instead to bolster yourself up so you do have a feeling of resilience and strength? And then how do you need to work with yourself so that you let go of the need for all of your relationships to be idealized, because they're just not going to be. This is real life, right? So this is a hard one in our Western culture. As we start to recognize our own little foibles related to control, we also start to recognize our own little foibles related to who we think we are. Who am I now that I have experienced these losses? My identity forever shifted when my son got sick. I was a soccer mom. I was a yoga teacher. I was the mom of a straight A honors student who had an extraordinary scholarship to a great university. That was all part of my identity. And now I'm the mom of a really sick kid who's going through homelessness, incarceration, psychosis that he has no idea he's sick, right? Who am I now? I had to reconstruct my identity. I became an advocate. I became a speaker on this topic. I became an expert on severe mental illness. I had to rethink who I was. For many of us, advocacy becomes part of that new identity, but not for all. I have a dear friend whose son with schizophrenia is not doing well. She took a job working for a professional baseball team, and she hosts baseball games. And she has a completely new identity in this baseball stadium where she feels friendly and fun. And that has been incredibly healing and helpful for her. So where do I belong and find purpose in this new identity? And how do I keep reconstructing who I am and what my roles are in the world so that I know I belong, I have purpose, and then let go of needing an absolute identity that doesn't change, because it's going to forever be fluid, right? It's going to change as the circumstances of our lives change. So reconstructing identity, you might want to think about who you were in the before times, who you are now, and who you envision yourself becoming. Past, present, and future identity, all relevant to this coping strategy. Revise attachment. The struggle people have with this one is they think it means to let go and accept. No. I do not accept that my son needed to die from his severe mental illness. Just no. There was injustice. He was not provided the treatment that he should have gotten. He did not get best practice treatment. I do not accept the injustice of my son's poor treatment for his severe mental illness. However, I have given up my attachment to my life being dependent on my son's life and success. He died. He got really sick and he died. I am no longer attached to his survival as the only way that I can survive. I can survive even though he didn't. If he had survived, I could survive even if he was struggling. That terrible pillow that says a mom is only as happy as her most unhappy child should be burnt. That is a terrible pillow. Our lives cannot be attached to the happiness of others. We have to create our own life, right? So attachment can freeze us. I can't go on with my life because I feel too guilty if I find a modicum of happiness if my loved one who's sick is not happy. That doesn't work. It's not a functional way to approach life, right? So part of revising attachment is accepting that someone may be gone but not gone, here but not here. That psychological absence with physical presence, or that physical absence with psychological presence. Those are both versions of gone but not gone. So if I can accept that someone may be gone but not gone, that doesn't mean that I'm giving up. Okay. And then also we're accepting that what is real may not be ideal. And, somebody with a severe mental illness, for example, may be living in the reality of, hey, I got a decent job. It's not the job that I expected to have at this age and stage in my life, but I got a decent job. It's not ideal, but it's real, and I can accept that, right? So acceptance, again, doesn't mean giving up, and it doesn't mean accepting injustice. It means accepting what is real and letting go of needing all of your own forward momentum to hinge on something happening that is just not possible. The third piece of this, and by the way, what's in italic and boldface, these are like concepts. These are terms to use in this work. That's why they're boldface and italic. How do I let go while remembering? I had a couple in one of my seminars who was disenfranchised from their very, very unwell son. And so they celebrated his birthday by getting matching necklaces that had his name on them. And they did a whole little ceremonial ritual around honoring their son, even though they couldn't be in his physical presence right now because he's just too symptomatic. So how do I let go of wanting what I want while still honoring the memory of what's important to me? This one is one of the lessons that Dr. Pauline Boss actually shared directly with me through email when I told her a little bit about my story before I took her class. Letting go while remembering has been incredibly valuable to me on my ambiguous loss coping journey. Normalizing ambivalence is about accepting what we feel and knowing that even when our emotions seem to contradict one another, they're valid. So just sitting with ourselves and recognizing what emotions am I experiencing right now? Are they mixed? Do they seem to contradict one another? And I've had so many families thank me for saying this, so I'm going to say it to you. When my son died, I had a very confusing mix of both grief and relief. And admitting that relief was intensely painful and created all sorts of guilt until I took a good look at myself and I said, that makes sense. That is a normal human experience to have after the 4 years of struggle and intense pain that we have all been through. Of course, there is a sense of relief. Would I give up that sense of relief in a heartbeat to have my son back? Absolutely. Absolutely. But that doesn't invalidate the reality of that emotional experience of relief. So grief and relief, contradicting emotions, I normalize the fact that they coexist. That's how this coping strategy works. Can I give myself grace to feel what I feel? Now, if I can give myself grace to feel what I feel, I have some control over those emotional reactions. If I don't, if I let those emotions bottle up, they can explode. So the risk of not doing this coping strategy is a reaction to something that is overblown for the moment because we didn't address the emotions as they showed up. Sometimes an emotion shows up at a bad time. You know, you're having a conversation with somebody and it's not the right time to address an emotion that shows up. So you make a note to yourself, note to self. I just had a strong emotion that I'm going to go need to sit with later. Okay. But you can't just shove it down, bottle it up, and wait for that cork to blow. So normalizing ambivalence is about taking time, and this is self-care. Normalizing ambivalence, feeling what you feel, is a form of self-care. I am experiencing XYZ emotion right now. What's that like? Do I need to make some notes? Do I need to sit with it? Do I need to watch it travel through my body? I have a whole thought experiment on this one where we actually toggle between felt experiences of emotion in the body and recognize that both of those things can be experienced within the body at the same time. And it can be a way to have a felt experience of mixed emotions. So you might play with that. And then the sixth coping strategy that I'll share with you is about discovering new hope. And I want to disclose to you that I hated the word hope for a very long time. I went to some meetings where people said, hold on to the hope. And I just wanted to punch people. I was just furious because I saw no reason to hope that I was going to get what I wanted. It was not going to happen. Right? So holding on to the hope felt fake to me, and it felt like a waste of my energy when I needed to take action toward trying to make something different happen, right? It wasn't about sitting around wishing that the universe would line itself up and clean all this up for me. So I had a real struggle with hope for a long time. And the way that I reconciled it was by embracing hopelessness and just, no, I do not in any way anticipate that this is going to go well. I'm going to let the ground fall out from under me, and I'm going to look for a path toward what I might do with volition to try to shift the trajectory of where this seems to be going. So I replaced hope with agency. And that worked for me. Hopelessness with agency gave me direction and a way to envision something different into the future. And once I started to study Dr. Boss's work, I realized that's what she means by new hope. New hope is an action. It's not a thought. It's not just a thought. New hope is an action. New hope is agency toward what is still possible despite not getting what I originally wanted. It is an activity. So the first step, and this is the point 3 here in the questions, what is still possible despite not getting the outcome that I originally wanted? In order to put agency toward that question, we have to let go of old hope. We have to let go of wanting things to right themselves. And in my seminars, I use a picture of Humpty Dumpty here sometimes, right? Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall. We are not putting Humpty Dumpty together again, right? That is letting go of old hope. That genie's not going back in the bottle. Humpty's not getting put back together. That egg is broken, right? So if I can let go of that old hope and put agency toward what is now still possible, I can actively pursue new hope. Now, the second point on this one is fun. How might I play with ambiguity to increase my tolerance for it? And when we play with ambiguity, we do something outside the scope of our ambiguous loss. So this is not ambiguity related to the severe mental illness situation in my life. It's something else. For example, I'm a surfer. I paddle out. I mean, I look at the conditions. I don't paddle out when it's ginormous or when the winds are way too strong. But when it looks reasonable, I paddle out. I have no idea what I'm going to get. Am I going to get a ride? Am I going to get a face full of salt water? I don't know what's going to happen. It is an ambiguous uh, play project, right? So I paddle out with absolute ambiguity. I don't know. I hope I get some rides. I don't know. I don't know what's about to happen here. Cooking without a recipe, building a little walkway out of stones when you have no idea where those stones are going to meander or how they're going to fit together to create a path. Throwing wildflower seeds to the wind and seeing where they plant themselves. Going for a walk, knowing that you're going to get lost and you have no idea how long you're going to be gone, or a drive. Those are examples of playing with ambiguity. There are some games that involve ambiguity, charades, for example. I don't know. I don't know what I'm about to do here, but I'm going to act out this thing that I'm going to read on this piece of paper. Go, right? So the key here is that you recognize that what you're doing is ambiguous. And you notice that about what you're doing and you say, I don't know how this is going to go. This is ambiguous. I'm going to watch myself play with ambiguity. And you create an opportunity to watch yourself experiencing ambiguity with some curiosity and maybe even success, but you don't know, right? So playing with ambiguity is a way to increase your tolerance for ambiguity so that you can release old hope and begin to see what it's like to put agency toward what is still possible despite not getting what you originally wanted. Because now you're starting to get more comfortable with ambiguity and knowing what I said earlier, that you cannot fix the ambiguity. You're not going to get closure on this. You're not going to tie it up with a neat and tidy little bow. Okay, it's not ambiguous anymore. I'm good, right? It's going to forever be ambiguous. So how do you put agency toward what is still possible despite that ongoing ambiguity? So those are the 6 coping strategies. And altogether, they create this sort of Mobius strip. So we started with what have I lost and what does it mean? And then we traveled through the 6 coping strategies toward this idea of new hope. What is still possible? All those coping strategies are along the Mobius strip. And like I said, it's not a linear process. You're exploring your identity, your attachments, your ambivalence, all along the way of considering what's been lost, what is the meaning of those losses, and where is there still a sense of forward momentum, that new hope, right? So it's like a Mobius strip that is around your wrist for the rest of your life while you're playing with these possibilities. Almost every seminar group has had some really valuable discussions about how to use this knowledge to create community, because other people who haven't done this training or learned about ambiguous loss often really struggle to know how to support us when we have had ambiguous losses. So our seminar groups have come up with some things to think about and maybe even say. So, there's a name for what I'm going through. It's called ambiguous loss. That elevator pitch, an ambiguous loss doesn't have clarity or resolution. I am not going to get closure because I cannot fix the ambiguity. Saying to people, it's okay if you don't know what to say. I don't expect you to. But thank you for recognizing that I'm having grief related to an ambiguous loss. You can say, I'm working with some coping strategies. It's helpful if I can talk about them with someone who can listen and at least try to understand. I don't expect you to understand right away. These concepts are complicated. I'm just learning all of this. I appreciate having someone to talk to. But as you start to get more comfortable with the vocabulary, you can actually use this vocabulary to create a support network for yourself and those around you. So all of this is self-care. And I think our culture has a real misunderstanding about what self-care is. We think it means a trip to the spa or a nap or a pedicure. It doesn't. Self-care means pausing at the threshold of a room to take a deep breath and sort of prepare yourself for something you're about to say or do that might feel hard. Self-care means staying hydrated. Self-care is how you talk to yourself. The inner dialogue that you have with yourself. Are you being kind to yourself in the way that you dialogue with yourself? Are you being patient with yourself? Are you giving yourself time to rest, time to process? Are you giving yourself permission to feel what you feel? Normalizing ambivalence, that is an act of self-care. If you're feeling what you feel without acting out, that's an act of self-care. Cultivating curiosity instead of judgment. And then if you do need professional help, you're seeking that professional help. So I just have a few resource slides and then we're going to get into your questions. I do have an article on Treatment Advocacy Center's website about ambiguous loss. These are some key points. Especially I want to point out the second point, that coping is a fluid and nonlinear process, and there's no cure for this. It is a lifelong process of being with and coping with. Within that article on our website, there's also a video called Gone But Not Gone that's linked through our YouTube channel, but it's connected through the article, so you can get to both in the same location on our website. I was interviewed by the three moms who do the Schizophrenia Three Moms in the Trenches podcast, talking about ambiguous loss in episode 85. So if you want to hear me talk some more on the topic, that's a place to do so. I am currently accepting registrations for my next 8-week seminar, which begins on January 13th. It's an 8-week seminar. We meet 8 times for an hour and 15 minutes to go over these coping strategies. I have an alumni group that meets the first Tuesday of every month, which is why we don't have class on February 3rd or March 3rd. So this is a free webinar on Zoom. So if you're interested, that QR code takes you to the registration link. That registration link will go public soon, but right now I'm still in like early bird registration period. You can also email me if you want more information about my program. It's real easy. It's just jclark@tac.org. And then this last slide is so fun for me to share with you tonight. I have written a book about coping with ambiguous loss. It's called Gone Before Gone. And this mock-up of the cover I just got from my publisher this week. So this is hot off the press information that my book will be published in early spring of 2026. I can't tell you when yet, but you can watch for it. And you can stay in touch through text, social media. It'll go out through Facebook, and we'll be asking Bethany to reshare once my book's public. But I also have my own website called Mothers of the Mentally Ill, or MOMI, MOMI-WA.org is my own little personal website where I will be sharing information about the book when it's out there. Be patient with me. My website is a bit of a work in progress, so it's not perfect, but there will be information about the book on that website. So with that, I will turn it back to Bethany, and thank you all so much for being such an attentive, wonderful audience this evening.